Okay, cool. We're live, guys. Yeah, so you, Mike and Russ, of course, when the three of us are alone in this podcast, it becomes instantly a prog rock show. So we have to sort of watch that. So, but go on. I'm just updating the blog real quick, and then we'll start the show. But continue.
Well,
Mike.
the reason I got on this tangent is because I was flipping through the channels last night after all the 7 and 7:30 games, and the Genesis Sum of All Parts was on Showtime. And and every time I watch that now, after discussing with you, Russ, I notice even more the friction between Tony Banks and Peter Gabriel. How they're like jabbing each other.
It's palpable.
Yeah.
It's really palpable. Yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, so I got on the progressive rock tangent, and there was a BBC series on progressive rock that I had saved on YouTube, and then somebody had deleted it for copyright infringement or whatever. But I searched again and found it, and they were talking about what I think is Yes's best album, which is Close to the Edge, and they were interviewing Bill Bruford, and Bill Bruford was hilarious, talking about the sort of squabbles, and then I'll put that in small s, squabbles between him and Squire and John Anderson, and everybody was fighting for a little bit of territory, and how that was going on, and how that album was fantastic. And then as soon as that album was over, he figured that was the apex of what Yes could do, and he immediately left and went to King Crimson.
Yeah, he's a perfectionist. I met him and the band briefly when they stayed in my hotel, and probably chatted with John Anderson a bit longer than everybody else. But Bruford, you could tell the guy's a perfectionist. I mean, he's retired. He shouldn't be retired. He's better than half the drummers out there. Right. But to him, it's like he will never be the same to him, so he doesn't even want to try to outdo himself. He just retired. I mean, it's just, imagine Kevin Allen retired. He's still got good writing ahead of him.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Damn straight. I know. I think he can still skate, still come back and back check. Kevin can do it all. Still very responsible at his own end.
That was good brown nosing there, Russ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Russ, what do you know about Steve Moses? I'm writing a story about him right now.
I don't know a lot about Steve Moses, actually. What are you writing about him?
Really interesting. I was talking to a couple, oddly enough, 3 teams over the last couple of days, and 2 of them mentioned him. And then when I mentioned him, when I mentioned the 3rd team, I'm like, "You're not going to say something about Steve Moses, are you?" And they're like, "Oh, you know what's funny? We have a guy watching him. He's right now he's basically the story behind him. He's playing in Finland right now.
He's leading the KHL in scoring, and he's a free agent who can be signed. I believe can be signed by anybody.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's an undrafted free agent.
There are a lot of teams that are interested in him. I was trying to find his exact information, but I'm writing a story on him now. But
But, so he's. What about the guy from Dallas, Brunstrom? He turned out to be nothing, and he was sort of that guy one year. Remember Fabian Brunstrom?
Yeah, and I mean, there are pluses and minuses, because I mean, De Keyser was like that, as Kevin mentioned yesterday. But Jonas Gustafsson at the beginning of the 1 year, the Leafs considered him. His nickname was the Monster, and he was the next big thing. And then he turned out to be not even close to being the next big thing. But I mean, we're, as X said yesterday, we're coming up on college free agent time, and Matt O'Connor is one name. But I saw a list of players that teams are interested in, and there were a few Russian players from the KHL who were undrafted that are on potentially on teams' lists in terms of going out and signing these guys. And I don't know if they'd be eligible. I don't believe they'd be eligible for the playoffs if it was a playoff team, but it is the possibility of adding a prospect to the organization.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Teams are doing it now because it's easy to stash these guys. They're cheap. But just remember, I mean, like Eric Hartzell. Everybody went crazy over Eric Hartzell. He's in the ECHL now.
Yes.
I mean, so it's very hard for these guys. For every, Matt Zuccarello, there's 10 of them that fail.
Yeah. Tyler.
Yeah,
Tyler.
Right.
There's even more than 10 that fail, to be honest.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
Moses is in his 4th season over there.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I mean, he was a UNH guy, right?
Yeah.
Undrafted. But
Yeah, he has a lot of goals this year. He has 36 goals.
Yeah.
So he's playing really well.
I mean, look at Chicago signed Trevor. Chicago signed Trevor Van Riemsdyk, and until he got hurt, that looked like a pretty good signing. And a few years ago, when the Leafs dipped into the college free agency, they hit it big with Bozak, who's been an effective NHLer. But then they also signed Christian Hansen, who was the son of one of the Hansen brothers, and he barely made a scratch. So I mean, it is sort of like, you're playing, you're rolling the dice.
Here's what I've learned over time with the college free agents in the business, and of course business has picked up in the last 3-4 years on it. And we talked to a lot of directors of amateur scouting and GMs, assistant GMs on this subject, and what we're finding out, or at least what I'm finding out, is because we know they don't play a ton of college games, but guys are in great physical shape, sometimes it takes until that 4th year, or even when they are totally undrafted and out of college, to sort of see what they really are. Because they just haven't played enough games sometimes, or played enough shifts, or played enough power play to sort of see what these guys are. And that's why teams sort of have to shoot in the dark with these guys before they just go to, the CHL, not the Canadian Hockey League, the Central League, or something like that, and try and find them there.
Yeah. Where they really should go to scout is the practices.
Right.
And you think that's kind of funny, but, a lot of times that's what the MLB scouts do. This is about 100 years ago, but when I covered junior college baseball in Arizona in the 80s, they had a pitcher there, Central Arizona College, who didn't actually pitch in the fall ball. There's a fall schedule out there, at least there was back when I was there, and he didn't actually pitch then. He had some sort of tenderness in his arm, but he would warm up on the sidelines, and when he would warm up, you'd see 20 scouts running over there with radar guns, just watching him warm up. And he got drafted in the January draft. He actually never ended up pitching for Central Arizona College, just because he was drafted based on how he warmed up. So maybe we should follow the baseball lead.
Well, one of the things I found fairly interesting about last year's draft, and if you remember, Russ, when we were at the draft, people didn't think it was very deep. I mean, there was quality players in the first round, but then second, third round, it started to really fall off. And a few teams, Toronto included, drafted a lot of U.S. college players, and the reason that they did was because it's 4 years of development rather than them having to make a decision after 2 years and either sign the player to a pro contract or letting them go back in the draft. I mean, they have a kid, Nolan Vesey, whose brother Jimmy is in the Nashville organization, and Nolan is with Maine, and he's had a really good freshman year, and but they have three more.
Leading the nation in scoring, by the way, so it's good to draft his brother just in case.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I wouldn't say teams are parting the waters to get Moses on their team, but
how long have you been working on that, Ek?
It writes itself. Thou shalt not go undrafted. Okay, so let's start the show. Kev, tilt down a little bit. We're seeing the top of you.
Are you doing the webcast on a tablet?
Yeah, are you using your tablet today? All right, here we go. That's right. That was the first iPad. All right. Hello, Hockey World. It's Wednesday, March 11th, 2015.
I'm Michael Lagello.
I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
I'm Kevin Allen.
And I am Eklund, and I got the date right without looking, just completely guessing, and yeah, I just went for it. So so much to talk about. All right, so let's start here. We'll talk about some of the games last night, and then what I want to get into is I wrote a blog today on the 10 factors that matter in the playoffs and listing them in order of importance. So, and I'll give you the factors, and I want to get your opinions on them because what I found that was kind of interesting is how, and I'll read them to you in a little bit. But let's start here. We'll start with the games last night, and of course, Boston again. I mean, Boston again comes up big in a big way. And this game was closer than it appeared. I watched a lot of this game. There were times.
I think, Ek, why don't we just start out real quick with Kadri, just because it was breaking news.
Okay, let's start with Kadri. That sounds fine.
I mean, just because it just happened, an hour and a half ago, Mike.
Okay, so yeah, give us the latest. Captain.
Well, maybe Mike should speak to this because he's very familiar with Toronto.
Mike,
but obviously,
why don't you lead us through this, Mike? Start us off.
Brendan Shanahan came out about 10 o'clock this morning at the Air Canada Center and announced that Nazem Kadri, who had been healthy scratched for the game on Monday against the Islanders, would be scratched again tonight against Buffalo and against Calgary in the first game of their 3-game Western Road swing. He did not say specifically that it was tied to him being tardy for a practice on the weekend, but it was part of an ongoing issue with Kadri, and that this was basically being done to sort of as a wake-up call to him and to sort of get him straight. I mean, the organization thinks he's part of their future, and they're not elaborating on what specifically these issues were throughout the season, but they really want to nip it in the bud. And I think that they're taking a strong approach to this with Kadri, who is he has talent. I think he is a bit underachieved this year. We made fun of the fact that a few times, like early in the year, he compared himself to John Tavares, and I think everybody thought that was a pretty laughable comparison. But he is a young player, 7th pick overall, with a lot of talent, and I think they're not happy with the direction that he is taking his career. He's also a restricted free agent at the end of the year. I'm sure that might be a little bit of a factor because they need to make a decision of whether they want to sign on to this guy long term or whether they want to potentially move him in the off season. So I think Shanahan and Dave Nonis and the elite organization are really taking an approach toward Kadri of either straightening him out or sending him a message that he's got to do something different.
This comes on the heels, by the way, of course, if you're not following along, if you're not a Maple Leaf fan, of Kadri yesterday apologizing for being late, correct? And apologizing in what I thought was a really professional manner. Like I thought he manned up, so to speak. I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was impressive. And yet that's what makes this a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit stranger, perhaps the reaction to it. But I don't know, Kev. What are your thoughts?
Well, I agree. I mean, this is pretty major news around the NHL because I think, everybody's reading between the lines, and this is the way I would view it. I know everybody's got their own interpretation, but I would say the fact they made this public, because this doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
Rarely do you have this sort of behavior, which is off the ice behavior, and we're not really quite sure what it is, but it's obviously that they feel he has some bad off-ice habits. And I don't think that necessarily means that they're sinister in any way. It just, we've all heard stories of younger players and, how they react. I mean, Jeff Carter went through this, obviously, in Philadelphia, and Mike Richards, and they ended up, moving elsewhere. But I think the message I take from this is if they had given up on him, I think they would have just handled this privately, sat him out for the one game, not said anything to anybody about it, just saying it was an internal team matter. But the fact they've gone public to this says, hey, we still believe in this kid, and we want him to correct his behavior. And I think this is a real kind of a tough love message, and this really is unusual. I mean, I've been trying to think of an example of this where it's this many games and it's this public. Usually they handle these things, and the other point is it's obviously about a lot more than what happened Sunday.
Right, right.
If it was just missing a meeting, we would not be where we are today. So I think people around the league, his peers, Brendan Shanahan's peers, I think were pretty impressed by him taking this kind of stand, which, I think he's trying to change the culture there, and I think he's trying to say that the logo is important and how you behave is important, and this is a historic organization, and maybe the standards have to be high at all times. So I thought this was, I thought it was probably the right thing to do if you really believe this young player can be salvaged. And oftentimes, as we all know, this is just a matter of maturity. And at 24, you should be there, but everybody matures a little bit differently, and maybe he's just 6 months away from having it all together. But I think they clearly feel he's salvageable, or they wouldn't be doing this.
Yeah, good point, Russ.
Yeah, the guy who I think of in a case like this, Kevin, is sort of like Don Murdoch. Not saying they have the same problems, obviously they don't, but the Rangers took a similar stance with him back in the day, and he had a real couple of successful seasons, but they saw that they just didn't like the way this guy handled himself off the ice at the time. He was probably right around the same age. He was in the kind of same city that, you get a lot of attention paid to you, and Kadri does have a lot of talent, and, he's taken his bumps too. Like Dallas Aikens called him fat that time on Twitter, and that was a big deal, and then he went to have a great year, and then now all of a sudden he slipped back a little. I think it's maturity, and I think they are going to stick with him because I still think he's a talented guy. I mean, he's got 16 goals on a bad team, so I think they figured, hey, you know what? Let's just work with him rather than just casting him off for a trade, because that's what we used to do. So I give Shanahan credit for this.
Well, what's really the other point here is that for as you just sort of cast him as underachieving, and I think everyone expected him to be at a higher level. But when you compare him to the rest of his group, he's one of Ben and Mike. I'd like you to chime in on this. I think he's been one of the higher achieving players on the team. Like he's actually, when I've watched the team, I've been, he's had some good games where, he's looked pretty good while the rest of his teammates have not. So he's worth saving, in other words.
Yeah, I mean, he's had an inconsistent year. I mean, at times he's been very good. I mean, he's played a little better defensively than he has in the past, and that's always been a question mark. But the funny thing was, yesterday, when it was after it had been announced that he was a healthy scratch on Monday, I did a comparison of the first 7 picks of the 2009 draft. I mean, Tavares was the number 1 pick, and of the 7 picks, and Kadri was 7th. The only one who had numbers comparable to him were Braden Shen, and Braden Shen stayed in junior longer and stayed in the American Hockey League for a little bit before he was then moved from LA to Philadelphia. All the other players above him, Oliver Ekman-Larsson's offensive totals are almost as good as Kadri's as a defenseman. So he is trailing those guys in terms of their progress, and I think he has just as much talent as most of them. It's just a question of him applying himself, and maybe these off-the-ice distractions are part of what's going on. I mean, I don't know any details. I wouldn't even say anything even if I did know it, because I don't think that's really proper. But I think what they want, and to your point, Kevin, I think they want to keep this guy. I think they want to build around him, but they want him to be, he's 24 years old. He should be a centerpiece of the organization going forward, and not somebody they're going to dispose. And I think guys like Kessel or Phaneuf or Bozak, if they had problems with them, they wouldn't sit them down, because they're probably going to move those guys, and it doesn't really do anything but bad to their value going forward. But with Kadri, I think they want to keep him, and I think they want to teach him a lesson, and that's why they've suspended him.
Is there any possibility that this is, and I agree with what you said there, especially the last thing you said, Mike, that this is the right player to send a message with for the Leafs? Like, if you're going to send a general message to the entire organization, this is the guy you would do it with. A guy who is perhaps, going to be here, perhaps not. He's gone the bubble. He's going back and forth. Yeah, they're showing confidence in him, but because of the way they did it publicly, that's why I'm thinking. It feels like if it was just Kadri, why would you go public with it? If you wanted this to be a clear, shot across the bow, so to speak, this is the way you do it. You find a player that might not be in your plans in the future, and you don't go after the players that will be, and you make sure it's known that we're not going to screw around in this. And he's being made a little bit an example of.
Well, they healthy scratched David Clarkson a month before they traded him.
I don't think it's an example, but I think it is in all of the.
Go ahead. Kevin.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Kevin, you there?
I just think that I think this is an all of the above situation. Like I think it's, I think Brendan. Let me start here. I was reading the story about this was happening, and I don't often go down to the comments section, but I did, and I was stunned to see people in a serious discussion about whether Brendan Shanahan should be fired, not over this, but over the idea that we're waiting for him to do something, and he hasn't done anything. And
right.
And one of the guys who was in the business world said, in the business world now, CEOs are expected to take action immediately. It's not like one of those things where they study for a year and then come in, because there's pressure on the stock price and everything else. So his position was, why don't we hold our hockey CEOs to the same standards? Because as fans, and they're stockholders, They're not really, but that's the way he viewed it as. And
Yeah.
he said, we expect results. And he said, I've seen none of that. And he goes, no, you may think I'm crazy, but anyway, I say that only because I don't think Brendan Shanahan thinks in those ways. I know him pretty well, and I think he's pretty calculated in his approach. However, he may see it, just as you articulated, see it as time to send a message to everybody and say, hey, look, I'm going to be intolerant of this type of behavior. I've watched now for a season. I've seen where we're at. Kadri is symbolic of the moving forward of the young players we're going to bring in. I'm going to send a message to him, to fans, to players who are going to come here and say, look, I'm not going to be tolerant of that. So I think it is an all thing. I think this is specifically about Kadri, but I think, and I don't think Shanahan gave this any deep thought, but I'm sure he's not displeased that he's sending a message out there for everybody.
Yeah, I think he gave it a lot of deep thought because he's Shanahan. And I think
that's fair. That's fair.
You know what I mean? I think he knew it because he very much knows the difference between making this public and private. He very much knows what that means in Toronto. He knows where this is anywhere, but he knows where this is the time of the year. The fact that the Leafs, this is the time of year you can do something during the regular season. It's not going to affect how things go, but he can still do it.
Shanahan's taken some shots across the bows in the last few months, even for something as innocuous as the fact that he lives in New York City and commutes to Toronto every once in a while, which I think is ridiculous. I mean, I don't know why the president of the organization has to live every day in the city of Toronto. I mean, I think in this day and age you get an idea of what's going on with the organization, via conferencing, via phone, via the social media, all aspects. You don't need to be living in Toronto to feel the pulse of what's going on with the Leafs. If that was the case, I shouldn't be writing and covering the Leafs because I live in Buffalo. It's a joke.
Right, and I do agree with that too. I mean, I usually agree with that 100%. But when your team is in dire straits, it changes a little bit. Like if I was running the team and I didn't live there, that was fine. I mean, Pierre Gauthier for the longest time was the assistant GM of the Montreal Canadiens and lived here in Philadelphia. And I'd sat with him in the press box and ate with him every night. But he was the assistant GM of the Montreal Canadiens, right? And it was fine. He didn't have to be in Montreal. He was here. He was scouting and he was talking to people all the time. But when you're Shanahan and you're in what is being called like a burn to the ground rebuild. I don't know that you have to be in Toronto, but I thought the criticisms weren't completely out of left field in this particular case of him not being there more. It's really hard to tell because I don't know exactly what's going on, but I could see why fans would say that in this particular case. Like, if the team was just going along, yeah, it wouldn't matter. But they're not just going along. They're in a dire spot, and they have to change things quickly. And he did. He was very, and I was, there were a lot of people who, and myself included, who were kind of critical of the fact that he hadn't done anything noticeable. But then, the more you thought about it, and the more, I talked to people who knew him, and because I don't know him as well as you do, Kevin. The more people said to me, "This is just Shanahan's way. He's going to figure this all out first, and then he's going to strike." And that I think this is the strike after figuring it all out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we all appreciate that. I mean, there's nothing worse than going in and just blowing everything up without evaluating what's there and what's worth saving and what's not. And I think the more I think about what you said about with regard to how much thought he gave it, I guess my only point would be, I think this is more about Kadri than it is about making a statement. Like I think he's, this was not. He just didn't say, well, let me find a player here. I need a player. Okay, I'll use Kadri.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I agree with you there. It wasn't just a blind. Yeah. It wasn't just being made an example for the hell of it. He had an opportunity here to use a player.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was about Kadri and his attempt to salvage him, and seeing, he is the most skilled center they have, and he really has not. I mean, Mike just pointed out that he has not lived up to expectations, and the interesting thing about it is, I was thinking about this now, and we just went through this with Evander Kane. It is amazing, like when you have a player on your team, his behavior is as important as his skill level. But when you don't have him, you totally discount what he does off the ice. And right. The reason is because we all know is that you can turn a skilled player into a model citizen, but you can't turn a model citizen into a skilled player. Right. So, And I think that's why everybody looks at this and like Kadri's trade value is real high. I mean, there'd be how many teams do you think?
Oh yeah,
10, 12, 15 that would want him. Yeah.
Well, look at
because
Jeff Carter's trade value was really high. Jeff Carter's value was high. They got a lot for Jeff Carter.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm sure this was not at the top of the list of what Brendan Shanahan's considerations were in terms of this suspension. But the fact is that Nazem Kadri is a restricted free agent at the end of the year. They're probably not going to make a long-term commitment to him because I don't think they really know what they have still. They're going to make him sing for a supper. They're going to probably sign him to a 1 or 2 year deal and say, okay, Naz, you're 24 years old. You've got all this talent in the world, but you need to straighten things out. Show us. Prove it to us that you can be a number 1 center or you can be a better NHL player. And if you do, we will pay you. And if you don't, see you later. So I think that is what Brendan Shanahan and the Leafs organization are putting in front of him right now. Show us or see you later.
The final thing about this I want to say is the fact that Shanahan is making these statements in notice. Does it bother anyone? I mean, I'm not saying it's wrong, obviously, but there's such a perception that Shanahan's like the guy and Nonis is a puppet, and then this happens like this. It kind of perpetuates it.
Well, up until this announcement, it had been Nonis, and Nonis was out on a scouting trip, and this was something that was immediate, and they needed to say it. So, but I mean, Brendan Shanahan was very careful in saying that it was in consultation with Nonis. So I think they're working hand in hand.
Okay, that's fine. I didn't know that part of it. Sorry, I apologize. Yeah, so I will keep on top. We'll obviously discuss this more in the future.
Yes.
I think we'll talk about the Maple Leafs again at some point down the line. But
tomorrow we'll talk.
Yeah.
Leaf Buzz here on HockeyBuzz.com.
Yes. But for sure. But let's talk about last night a little bit, and I want to talk about Boston and Ottawa because I did watch this game, and man, oh man, I've now watched Boston play 3 straight games. For what it's worth, I just happen to have watched them play 3 straight games, as sometimes happens in the season when you're watching. You just end up watching one team for 3 different reasons. And Boston again won a game last night that they could have lost, and there were moments in this game. There were moments in this game where Ottawa was dominating them, and Ottawa hit I think 3 posts in the span of 4 minutes at one point, and they were all over them. It was crazy, but Boston again showed what they do, which is they were incredibly opportunistic. They found their spots. They scored their goals, and this is what makes it so hard about a team like Ottawa, because Ottawa's played so well for such a long time, and Boston was struggling, and Ottawa's getting closer, and it looks like they could do it, and it looks like they're getting closer, and Boston's struggling. And it's one thing to play hard enough to get yourself back in the race, but it seems like it's 20 times harder to get over the hump. You ever notice this? It's just that one moment when the team, it's like Boston might struggle, but to actually knock Boston out of that seat, you're going to have to really hit them with a big gun. You're not going to be, it's not going to just be they're going to continue to struggle and you're going to pass them. It doesn't seem like that's the way it works.
Youngsters to plug in like Ryan Spooner. I mean, when they have guys that they can bring up and bring in fresh legs and get some impact, like I saw Spooner play with Taylor Hall at the Top Prospects game years ago, and he's a guy who actually plays better when he's on a better line. And so he gets in the flow of the offense. He could be a little dangerous. And so a team like Ottawa, they have some guys, but most of their great guys are up, and then the other ones are developing.
No, it's so true. It's so true. And it was just such a good game. We got our echo back, man, again. That's crazy. Log out and log back in, Mike, if you could. That worked last time. See ya. And I do before we have to let you go too, Russ, because I know you have more important things to do.
No, nothing's more.
Appreciate it. Just kidding. I do want to talk a little bit about the Islanders. Last night I had the big box with 4 screens going, as I had NHL.com with the 4 different screens going, and it was great. I projected that to my big TV. And it was awesome.
You were like Jim from Taxi, but the 21st century version.
Exactly. So it's not. I guess it's not. I'm going to log out, Russ. Talk for a second about the game, and I'll be right back.
Sure. The Islander Ranger game was great because look, I'd seen a bunch over the years, and of course I'd gone to the Coliseum at the very beginning to see Nets games at first, and then to start seeing hockey. And I'll tell you what, The buzz was there. It was tremendous. There was a little bit of an odor like the circus was in town. It wasn't fun that way. But once you got in there and things got started, fans were interacting, it's just a great rivalry. It's one of the best in sports. But it was a 50-50 split, though. That was the interesting thing. And it wasn't a complete sellout. It was another one of those paper sellouts where maybe StubHub screws a lot of people for 500 to 750 seats because there were some decent amount of empty pockets of seats. But game action, it was unbelievable. I mean, literally it came down to a crazy deflection off Ryan Strom's skate, right? But this game had everything. It had great goaltending. Cam Talbot played the best game of his life, even though it wasn't a shutout. I would say it's the most pressure he's been under. He plays a great game. Rick Nash gets that goal at the end. Kevin Hayes gets the goal of the game, I thought, and the unbelievable way he muscled the puck into the net. Anders Lee, Rangers can't stop him. Dan Girardi is no match for Anders Lee this year, and so he's another guy that really kills that team, but has really elevated the Islanders with that kid line with Strome and Nelson. So, again, these two teams, if they match up in the playoffs, it's going to be as good as it ever was, and nobody's going to be able to pick the winner decisively because the only way I think the Rangers can knock them off would be a first-round win. If they don't play them in the first round, I think they're going to be in trouble because the Islanders can play, and Halak really enjoys playing against the Rangers. You could see it.
Russ, I was surprised when I don't know if you tweeted it or you put it on Facebook that there were seats in the stands for that game. I mean, I thought the last game at Nassau Coliseum, Rangers, Islanders, everything that was on the line that it would be standing room only, but
it wasn't.
Yeah, that's bizarre.
That's really strange. It was a great game to watch there.
Fairly quickly, and that parking lot's not the easiest to get out of if you've ever gone to a game there.
Oh yes, I never will get out. I always go across the street to get some food because I hate getting out of that parking lot. I always go to the restaurant across the street.
Yep.
I think that Islanders-Rangers rivalry, particularly this season, is just so much fun because, as I wrote yesterday, I took some abuse from Islanders fans over this, but the Islanders can be the top team in the conference, but not be the best team in New York, which I think is possible. Which is possible, simply because they've just had a tremendous season. But the Rangers, even though what are they 3-2? We figured out yesterday, right? The Islanders are up 3-2 this season.
Yeah, the Islanders won the season series 3-2.
Yeah, but the Rangers have played better of late, and the Islanders haven't been bad, but the Rangers have been better, and they're they're better set up for the postseason. Like I mean, Halak has been great, but you'd still rather have Lundqvist. Mm-hmm. And the Rangers' defense, I mean, Boychuk's been great. It's a much improved defense, but you'd still rather have the Rangers. So it'll be interesting. I like your analysis though, because I think why I agree with that is that I think one of the things I think the Islanders need a little playoff experience. So what you're saying is if they they get it in the first round and figure out what to do. Yeah. Then they'll be even better in the second round, and that's probably true. I think a first round would favor the Rangers, but I think this is I agree with you. This is a great matchup, and I like where both of these teams are at. The Rangers have impressed me. It's amazing. Glenn Sather felt like they were trying to run him out of there because he hadn't done anything early, but he's built a nice team there now. We've liked the moves he's made. In terms of making that team a contender for last season, getting into the final, and there's no reason why they couldn't do that this season again.
And Russ, I think the one thing that was apparent from last night, from what I watched, is that the Islanders are. I mean, I don't know how long Leddy is supposed to be out. I know I saw him get injured in Toronto on Monday, but they missed Leddy in the lineup. I mean, they were playing Brian Straight and they were playing Hickey a lot more, and I think that Leddy not being in the lineup exposes that defense a lot.
A little bit. I'm going to tell you that defense was still faster than the Rangers defense, and their passing was great. What really hurt them was on their power play. Leddy is their main power play guy. The minute he was out of there, their power play was confused for most of the game. They were passing backwards too much. They didn't seem to know where to go. Tavares knew where to go, but other guys seemed to be confused. So that was the one thing where you saw the worth of Leddy, and so they really do need him back badly. In that regard, I agree.
Yeah, that's a good point. I saw that too. I watched this game late last night on the highlight, and on the replay, and that's what I saw too. The power play just looked confusing. For sure, they definitely had their moments, but man, it would
One
be a
thing
hell
I
of a
saw
series.
too that you would never see years ago. I saw twin guys. They looked exactly alike. They had to be brothers. They had to be twins. One had a Nash jersey. One had a Tavares jersey. And they were walking like arm in arm practically. You would never have seen that in the 80s.
That's amazing. That's a cool. You got to write a story about those guys.
That's awesome. I love that.
Guys. That is great. Wow.
Now, I always get on guys that stop and snap every photo and put it on Twitter, but you should have put that one on Twitter.
I know they were walking fast. I should have put it though. I know.
That's definitely. I mean, it's such a. I mean, it's going to be so much fun, and I really do hope that's not the last time they play in the Nassau Coliseum. So.
Me too.
Yeah.
Let's hope. Knock on wood there. It'll be good. But
if we get a Pittsburgh Penguins run and they win the Metro, you could have Pittsburgh, Washington, and New York Rangers Islanders in the first round.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That would be awesome. That would be awesome.
That's what we want. We really need to see that. So yeah, and then quickly on the Flyers, the other game that mattered last night in playoffs, the Flyers again lost in regulation. And just I really am starting to feel bad for Steve Mason, who looks like he's playing his heart out, and this is an example of a team just not getting rewarded for anything he's doing. It's frustrating to watch a player go through that. He's playing really hard.
Contract, right? I mean, they gave him life again when no team would touch him. So he's going to be willing to put up with it, considering that. And I think next year will look a lot better for them. It's over for them. That's all.
Yeah, it is. They are definitely. There's a group of players on the team that are still working really hard, but the frustration level is starting to really mount. Losing Del Zotto doesn't help right now. There's a lot of things going on. They needed him. He was a main part of their offense and defense. So, and Dallas Sagan does not look nearly 100%. He looks good, but he doesn't look nearly healthy to me. I wonder how healthy he is, considering where they are. I think it's a little bit risky that they're playing him. But I know they still have a shot at the playoffs, and I'm sure they would only, I'm sure he's been through doctors and all that stuff. But I don't know. It's a little bit risky in my mind. All right, so let's talk.
Well, one last thing quickly. The game that I watched, Tampa and Montreal. Again, I think it's illustrated that Montreal in the playoffs are gonna have a difficult time scoring because. It was nothing going into overtime, and Tyler Johnson scored a goal. I think it deflected off of one of the Montreal forwards' skates into the goal. And Price played great. He made 35 saves, but Carey Price in and of himself cannot win the game for Montreal. They need to score goals, and they last night in a game that meant something, they couldn't get one by Ben Bishop.
I know, and it was odd because Montreal they now have lost 3 of 4, I guess, to Tampa. We figured out. So and Tampa looked good too. Bishop looked really great. It was a goalie battle for sure. But one of those it would be a great series to see them play again. We obviously could see it. It wouldn't be surprising at all.
Is anyone else starting to worry a little bit about the Winnipeg Jets?
Yes.
That was a tough goal that Pavlik gave up, and it's going to happen to everybody, but not at that time.
I agree. I mean, they're just hanging on right now by a thread because they're 1 point up on LA, right? And LA's got a game in hand. LA gets the win last night, and basically, a huge game for Colorado that they needed to win. So yeah, I agree. It's hard for me to imagine that the Kings, that the Kings won't make the playoffs and that the Wild won't make the playoffs. So I just can't see either of those two teams falling out.
No, me too. The only thing, if you're a Winnipeg fan, you'd say, could Calgary slip down? And without Giordano, I mean, I've been on record as saying I think they could still do it because even though he is their most important player, that's not what they're all about. They're not about their best player. They're about finding ways to win in different ways each night. So I think they have an opportunity, but if you're a Winnipeg fan, you got to hope they're going to fail a little bit because I agree. I just cannot envision the Kings not making the playoffs. They just know too much about it. Like they're an expert. They're an expert on paint.
Exactly.
And then when they're an expert on how to play in the playoffs, and And I think it's like Samson. They get the beards going, and they once they get the beards going, they know how to play.
Yeah,
It's
I like it. I like it. Yeah, I know. You're exactly right. And to me, what knocks teams out of the playoffs is how good are you when the chips are down. That's what it comes down to. Everybody's going to win, lose games, but when you have to win a game, how good are you?
Yeah.
Who would you take if in a game between LA and Winnipeg, if one of those teams has to win the game?
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to.
Well,
You know what it's like? It's like that. When you see the road construction and like all the vehicles show up, and then it's just a total mess, and it looks like chaos.
Yeah.
Like you wonder like how the bulldozer know where to push the dirt and everything else. Well, the Kings are that construction site. They get there and it looks like total chaos, but they really do understand where to push all the dirt and get everything organized, and everything's going to come out. I mean, that's their skill. They just know how to make it all work in the postseason.
I agree.
If Winnipeg does miss, it appears the killing blow will have been Bufflin getting injured because he wasn't there yesterday. They scored 4 goals, and their defense didn't allow them to win the game. And Pavlik has had he's had mostly a pretty good season.
Yeah.
That goal that he let in last night was inexcusable, and things like that can cost a team a playoff spot.
Yeah, no, I agree for sure. All right, before we there's not much news today. I'm not really going to do a news segment today. Instead, I'm going to do our little playoff factor segment because all we have to really talk about is the fact that we have the Mick Eichel game of the night tonight between the Maple Leafs and the Sabres. So
yes,
that'll be fun.
I said the battle of who could care less. Yes.
Both teams have exactly the same record over a very large stretch of time. I saw it today. It's like 20. It's like 7-23 and 6 or something like that.
Good stat by Mike Harrington from the Buffalo News. 7-26-2 since the middle of December.
Both teams are exactly 7-26. Let's figure that out.
That takes work, man. You can't just you come up with a record like that. You got to work at it.
That's epic. That's losing 3 out of every 4 games you play. That's really something significant.
That's a level of consistency that most teams cannot find.
No. And then to have to actually equal each other, that's even harder. So and then the reporter who actually figured it out, props to him. That actually to actually go back to a point at which they actually equal each other, that's really good. All right, 10 factors for making the playoffs, and I always think about this time of year, and this was brought up to me because yesterday we discussed this a little bit. How important was home ice? How important is home ice in the playoffs? And we talked about matchups and how we're scoreboard watching and matchups at this point. And I know this echo is making everyone nuts, so I'm sorry, but we're working on it. We got rid of Mike. We're better now. Mike will be back though. Do you hear it still, Kevin?
I don't hear the echo. I haven't heard it all day today, so.
That's interesting. Maybe it's you.
Maybe it is me.
Turn your volume back just a little bit.
My volume? Okay.
Yeah, the volume of us coming to you. See if that changes it. We're gonna see. So here's my 10. I really don't hear it that much right now, and I think we'll just go with it. We're gonna have to suss this out off the air at some point. Okay, my factors. I'm gonna specifically mess up the order to how I had them, so I can get you guys to rank these for me. Okay, so I'm gonna say your top players being your top players. These are all also cliches right out of the book, okay? Because these are the things we always hear. Your top players have to be your top players. Players who have won elsewhere, okay? That's not okay. Home ice advantage. Leadership, leadership from your core, okay? Which is a little bit like top players being top players, but we'll just go with it. Your matchup, who you're playing against. Your goaltending. Your special teams. How healthy you are. Your depth on the blue line, meaning what we talked about before, you have to have like 8 NHL defensemen to make it through a Stanley Cup playoff, kind of, and 8 NHL quality defensemen because of guys who get hurt. So those are 10 factors. Give me your top couple, Kevin. What do you say?
Wow, yeah, we went over them.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it was a little quick.
Let me see if I can get a pencil here. I got a pencil.
Okay, I will write these down.
And then I can rank them as I.
Yeah, so we'll start here. Okay, so matchups.
Okay.
Playoff matchups. Your team health.
Okay.
Your special teams.
Yeah.
Your goaltending. Your home ice advantage. Players who've won elsewhere. team leadership, which I will include like captains, coaches, the whole 9 yards, that kind of thing. Playoff experience as a team, having been there before, that kind of thing. Depth on the blue line. I think that's 10. So I think we got 10 there. And your top players being your top players.
Yeah. Okay. Well, a playoff experience to me would be number one.
Number one,
because you know how much I believe that you got to know how you have to have experience losing in order to know how to win.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the teams that have been there before, that have sorted out what it takes to win, that is number one. And number two, I would say, is goaltending.
Yeah.
I've never seen a team win a Stanley Cup without. Nobody's ever won with poor goaltending.
Yeah.
I mean, that just not that I remember.
You won't win. Yep.
Yeah, it's always has to be strong throughout. So I would go goaltending number two, and then the thing about it is I've seen teams win. Remember, Boston won without a good power play.
Right.
So I don't think I feel good about that. The matchup is really important. You gotta match up favorably with the other team. So I guess right now I'll go with that. Health is good. Ken Holland of the Red Wings always talks about the fact that whenever they've won, they've been lucky with not having as many injured guys.
Right.
So 4 would be health.
Okay.
I actually
I'll let Mike go to a couple, so then you can keep working on your.
Yeah, that sounds good.
I actually think that the one that is the least important is home ice, because I think we've seen teams, Boston go to Vancouver in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final and win.
Right.
It's not impossible for a team in a Game 7 situation to win on the road, or even a Game 5 or Game 6 situation. So I think, to me, that's the least important one. But in terms of most important, I think goaltending has to be number one. I mean, the last one I can remember just getting average goaltending and winning the cup would have been Antti Niemi in 2010 against.
Yeah, we talked about that before, because people forget that Niemi won the series. This conference finals, he basically won that series for Chicago. So
right,
even though he wasn't a great goalie, he beat the Sharks.
Yeah, but he wasn't consistent throughout. And before then, I think it was the Gerber-Ward combo in 06, because Ward had his slumps. They bring in Gerber, and then they went back to Ward. So it was sort of a tandem effort, but it wasn't one guy. I mean, every time I think of Stanley Cup Finals and the teams winning them, I think of Tim Thomas in 2011 or Jonathan Quick. You always have a goaltender that stands on their head and saves their team even when they're not playing well. To me, health is big, because if you lose your key players, I mean, sometimes it's possible for a player to step up and fill in for an injured player, but more than likely, if you're a team like LA, you had all your key players throughout. You didn't lose any. You didn't lose Doughty. You didn't lose Gaborik. You didn't lose Carter. Your big players were your big players, and they were there throughout. And sometimes, I mean, we can see Carey Price getting injured killed Montreal.
Yeah.
If Montreal didn't lose Price, they probably would have been.
Well, that's goaltending and health. So that's your number one and your number two.
Right.
Yeah, I'm going to switch my number 3 because I'd forgotten about it. Your top players have to be your top players.
So that's before matchups for you?
That's before matchups for sure. Because if you think about it, the reason you got where you are is your flag carriers have done a good job, and if your flag carriers have to do the same, or you're not going to win the final.
Yeah, I mean the exception to the rule last year was Rick Nash not coming through for the Rangers, but the Rangers got to the final, based on Lundqvist and based on balanced scoring throughout. And one of the reasons why Pittsburgh didn't go further is because Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin really did not play fantastic hockey.
They didn't play up to their level. Yeah.
Yeah, they
didn't score. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, well, and it still works because the Rangers didn't appear to have any answer for the Kings because Nash wasn't scoring.
Right. So they definitely needed Nash and Richards more to come up bigger. Throughout,
right. Yeah. I still think that works. That's why I think your top
so
players.
That is your number 3. Matchups, then health, 4 and 5. So your number 1 is goaltending. Number 2 is health, Mike.
Yep. And I would say number 3 is probably playoff experience as a team. You can't beat that. I mean, I think one of the reasons why Boston over the last few days won, even though it's not the playoffs, but it's a sort of a playoff scenario right now with them feeling the heat of Florida and Ottawa, is because you have enough players there that won a Stanley Cup and got to a Stanley Cup final over the last 4 years that they sucked it up, and Tuukka Rask and Bergeron and Marchand came to the forefront and got them to win games against Philadelphia, against Detroit, now against Ottawa, and now they'll probably make the playoffs because of that experience. And that experience, even if they're a wild card, if they face Montreal and they get Krejci back, that experience makes them dangerous.
Yeah, I'm with you there. So that's number 3 for you. What do you have? What's number 4?
Number 4, no, I'd actually go with leadership. I think that is important. I mean, we can see from the Kings. I mean, last year, and this is a question of what's going to happen this year. They don't have Willie Mitchell. Willie Mitchell was a leader on that team. Now, I think they have the requisite leadership and the talent to still win. But until they do, and we're going to see whether the absence of a guy like Willie Mitchell will hurt them or not. I mean, I think they have guys like Dustin Brown. And also, and he may not have been the captain, and we think Richards will be back for the playoffs because there's no cap restrictions when the playoffs come around. But the absence of Richards, if they don't bring him up, what is that going to mean for that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. All right, so Kevin, what is your next one? You got 5. It's health. I have right now.
I've got leadership right there.
Leadership after health.
I mean, leadership is always important, but I think on teams that go far in the playoffs, they usually have multiple guys doing that. So sometimes it's not necessarily having 1 or 2 guys; it's just needing veteran guys. So I have leadership right there because it is important. Mike was absolutely right. You need guys to step up and lead the way, and it's usually sometimes it's not so much what they say, but what they do. When things are going bad, usually it's the top players on the team that respond, and you feel confident if you know that you have guys that are gonna, when things are down, pick the team up. So I would say it's important.
I also think that's really important in the ebb and flow of a series, which is such a big thing. The ebb and flow of a playoff series is such a big deal. That there's who wins game 3, is always such a big, like who wins the odd games, they always say 1, 3, and 5, right? Those are the games that are like to turn the series either way,
Well, one thing about one of the categories, I think in the special teams, I think you can get away with advancing in the playoffs if you don't have a good power play. And two things come to mind. The Bruins, as Kevin said, in 2011, they brought in Thomas Caberlet from Toronto to be the point man of the power play. He really didn't have an effect, and they really didn't score throughout the playoffs in the power play. And if you remember, the Rangers' power play was hideous the first 2 rounds of the playoffs. They were
it was terrible.
1 for 27 or something ridiculous like that, and they still got through. But I don't think that a team can advance in the playoffs if their penalty killing isn't great. If their penalty killing isn't great, they're not winning.
Yeah, that's fair.
And what I would say about the power play, in my opinion, there's the thing that's sort of unsaid about special teams in the playoffs is if your power play is good, it changes everything about the game because it changes how the other team plays. It changes what the other team can do. If your power play isn't good, the other team can take all sorts of liberties with you. They can hold you up, yank you down, that kind of stuff, and not worry as much. If your power play is deadly, the other team has to play off of you, and I think it changes how things happen beyond when you're on the power play, and that's one of the things I always think is fascinating about the playoffs. So who do you have after leadership, Kevin?
Well, let's go. I'm going to go down to the bottom and sort of work my way up and see where I'm up with. I guess my last 2 are going to be, and one of them is going to shock you. 10 is definitely home ice, but 9 is players who have won from other teams.
Okay.
I think that's a gimmick, and I get it. It's just an extra layer of motivation. When you have the guys and you bring them in, but I think it's far more important on teams that have limited experience, in the playoffs. I think playoff experience is playoff experience. So, it's nice to have and throw that in there, but I don't think it's important as having a good goalie or good leadership or any of that. So I want to make that 9, and then on 8, I would have the special teams, just because I don't think the power play is there. But I agree with Mike. I mean, you got to have proficient, penalty killing. So we got that as 8, and then at 7,
You'd have the defense, depth on the blue line.
Yep, depth on the blue line. So
yeah.
I mean, one of the things I've found kind of fascinating is that in recent years, anyway, going back to Carolina is when it sort of, after that it changed, you have to have a dominant defenseman. If you look now, the last few years, Chara for Boston, Doughty for LA, Duncan Keith. I mean, these are all big-time Norris Trophy winning defensemen. Anaheim had Pronger and Niedermeyer. Detroit had Lidstrom. Letang. And then you really got to go back to Carolina, where they really didn't have a dominant defenseman. But since then, you've had to have that guy. But depth in defense really is key, because it does seem like you always lose a defenseman, along the way in the postseason. And you wait on your way to 16
Oh
wins.
yeah, there's no way. I mean, it's amazing the guys that end up playing. I always find it fascinating, the guys in the Stanley Cup final who are among the top 6 defensemen for each team. There's always a few guys you would never have been, and that's probably their biggest moment of their careers. They will never again be in the spotlight like that, but we will talk to them. They'll be a central part of everything, because they are maybe the 8th or 9th defenseman on this team, but because of the whole war of attrition that is the Stanley Cup playoffs, they end up being thrust into the limelight.
And in the playoffs, coaches are less inhibited to overplay their better defense. I mean, Ryan McDonough played over 30 minutes most nights in the playoffs.
Yeah.
They limited guys like Strawman and whoever, I can't remember. Maybe it was Klein on the third pairing. And it was Girardi, it was Stahl, it was McDonough playing over 30 minutes a game, and I think that teams can cover up for missing one of their top 6 if he gets injured, blocking a shot, say, by just overloading the minutes of their top defenseman. And I think in the playoffs we're going to see Doughty's going to probably average 30 minutes a night.
Well, not only do they cover up for some of the players who are in their lineup. I mean, before we were talking about the loss of Leddy impacting the Islanders, and Quenneville used to not only hide Leddy but basically sit him when the games would get crucial, because he didn't believe in him defensively.
Remember, he unfortunately deflected in the goal that lost them the playoffs. Right?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. The other thing too is coaches lose their patience, obviously, in the playoffs. Yeah. And if things aren't going well with a player, they want to put someone else in. And at least once during the final, you're right, so and so is entering the lineup, and he hasn't played since March 14th or something. You know what I mean? Like, they're always throwing someone in there because of injury, or they just don't like how things are going, and they're just trying to kind of shake it up.
This is also when they'll sneak in the player that has like all this huge potential, but is some sort of head case, and you don't necessarily, but he's got so much skill. Like, this was the Pavel Brendel for the Flyers. Like, I remember him playing against the Devils in the semifinals, and the Flyers never would play Pavel Brendel, and suddenly he's there in Game 7 against the Devils. Just because he's obviously skilled, but this is when they try to sneak those guys in too.
They're always in the finals. I'm always amazed that you have these wild hair lineup changes where the coach wakes up on a Tuesday and decides, I'm just going to put this guy in because he, has a feeling or a. I love those things. So.
I'm starting Dan Carcillo, and nobody's stopping me.
I still to this day believe the Rangers made a mistake not playing Carcillo more in the Stanley Cup Finals against the Kings because of the history and the hatred that exists between Carcillo, Richards, and Carter when they were in Philly. And Carcillo really could have gotten under their skin better. And I really thought that was a mistake that Carcillo wasn't in there. It's just one of those little tiny things that I remember asking that question, and they said, well, no, we're going to go with the guys who got us here. I still feel like that was something that they could have done. So after leadership, who do you have, Mike? So that's your 4th. I've got goaltending, health, experience as a team, and then leadership for you.
Well, I'd probably go your top players being your top players.
Okay, so that's number 5 for you.
Yeah.
And you've got home ice as number 10.
Right. Home ice is number 10. I think I was putting special teams at 9.
Special teams at 9, right? Interesting. All right, so now you need 6, 7, and 8. So you've got depth at the blue line. Leaders.
That's 8. That's 8 because I think that can be covered up. I'm sort of lost here because it's
okay. The two others you have players you've won elsewhere, and playoff experience. No, they have that already. Matchups.
That'll be 6. I mean, it's impossible to say that matchups don't mean anything because if you look at Boston and Montreal over the last few years has not been as good as Boston, but Montreal last year beat Boston. It is a bad matchup for the Bruins. Now, I think this year, strangely enough, since Montreal is at the top of the division and Boston's going to be struggling to get into the playoffs, I think that might be flipped around because I think Boston might be a thorn in the side of Montreal. Again, the L.A. If you remember L.A. and St. Louis a few years ago, the last team that St. Louis wanted to face in the playoffs was Los Angeles. They just didn't match up well. So, I think they can be a determining factor in a playoff series.
You have failed to mention a factor that I believe in my list would fit in.
Okay.
Right near the top, and that would be luck.
Yes, luck.
You know how I feel about that.
Yeah.
We never really want to pay homage to it, but just the guy's biorhythms may not be right. Pucks hit sticks at the wrong time. Guys fall down. You never want to factor that in, but it always plays a role. Of all these 10 factors, you never quite know when exactly they're going to crop up, but luck's going to be there.
Luck's going to be in there.
Game. Luck plays such an incredible role, and I don't believe for a minute, even though I admire Scotty Bowman dearly, but I says you make your own luck. I just don't buy that. Things just happen that there are no explanation, and I understand what you're saying, but.
I agree. I agree with you. I don't ever like the expression "you make your own luck." It feels like it always feels like it's used in some sort of weird. It's only used by people who are unlucky.
Well, yeah. I mean, the point of that I do understand is you want to get yourself in such a position where luck huge impact. So in that respect, I see there is some grains of truth to it.
Well, that's just working hard. If you want to take, I mean, that's just working hard, and
it is.
It's really nothing
hard work, and no, that's right. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's the Sutter thing. Sutter believes in his heart that you can win by outworking the other team. If you totally outwork the other team, you're going to win, and I don't believe that. I think that you could be the hardest working team in NHL history, and you weren't going to beat the Oilers in the 1980s. I mean, not the way that game was played, and not with the talent they had, and. Oh, the other thing. Another thing I think it is true too that sort of plays into it is, and that I've noted in covering the league is, everybody always overthinks everything.
Yes.
And we analyze it to death, and yet our analysis rarely centers on what actually will transpire in the game because every game is a different portrait and it gets painted in a different way. So I mean, everything we say makes sense, but it never unfolds that way.
No, because there is so much randomness. I think there is a great amount of randomness to hockey. And that's what is frustrating and endearing about it all at the same time.
Yes.
The one thing I didn't put on here that I really kind of was debating about, and was the fourth line efficiency, which is something that is really in the past few seasons has been a huge thing. Fourth line's coming up big, and if you draw every Stanley Cup champion, you can look at their fourth line, and you've got, that fourth line has been a factor in all those runs. So,
I know something that the analytics crowd never factors in, especially in baseball. That's tough for them to factor it in, and I think it's probably the same in hockey. Is the ability to play clutch. And if you saw Claude Lemieux score throughout his career in the playoffs, step up more than often. Regular season he was an average player, and average or a little above average, but in the playoffs he was a beast. And you have players who Justin Williams, who just steps up and scores the big goal and the key goal at the key time and always does it. And it's something that's very rarely quantifiable, but you recognize it in a few players, and they just seem to do it over and over.
I mean, Jordan Everly was this for Team Canada. I mean, was incredible. Remember, Jordan Everly is.
Yeah. You can't quantify it so well in hockey because oftentimes it's big hits and it goes beyond goal. I think it's a little easier in baseball because the clutch players are the people who hit with runners in scoring position and go ahead RBIs and all that, and that is somewhat quantifiable. With in Detroit where I live, Victor Martinez always pushing 400 with runners in scoring position, so he's clutch. But you're absolutely right, though. I mean, clutch players, and there's always been guys. Esa Tikkanen was a far superior player in the postseason than he was in the regular season. We've seen that, and the other factor too, which I've always enjoyed, and I think it works into what X's talking about with the fourth line, is the grand, and I mean this, the grand tradition of the unknown goal scorer. Like every year, someone rises up, a John Druce, a Contos. Who rises up and plays at a much higher level than he has played in the postseason, and you can never predict who that's going to be.
Yeah, that's always awesome.
They always.
We all know them, right? I mean, we know we remember Contos, and you remember all this. It's absolutely true, and every year we've seen them. It's so just to go through real quick before we get out of here because we are running it. We have all three of our lists. So my list was goaltending, number 1. Special teams, number 2. So that was kind of interesting. I've always been a big fan. I've always thought those were the 2 most important things. Health, number 3. Matchups, number 4. Your top players, number 5. Depth on the blue line, 6. Playoff experience, 7. Leadership, 8. Players who've won elsewhere, 9. So I agree with you on that, Kevin. That is a myth. And home ice, 10. We all 3 of us put home ice as the 10th most important factor in the playoffs.
Yeah,
that's pretty crazy. I mean, that is a crazy thing when you think about what we're all doing here. Like we're battling for position right now, and everyone's wondering. I wonder, it just doesn't seem to matter. I mean, it matters, of course, but it doesn't. This is where everyone talks about home ice is you get 4 games at home versus the other team gets 3 games at home. But in my opinion, home ice has always been about where the series will be decided. And the difference for me is that the home team, in all likelihood, unless it's a sweep, right? The home team it gets game 5 and 7, so they get 2 of the final 3 games. It's either usually going to go in 5, 6, or 7. 2 of those are in the home. 2 of those. It's harder. It's harder to win a series on the road, and that is where, to me, that's the difference with home ice advantage. That's why I think that's why if we went to the old system where 6 and 7 would be for the home team again, we'd go 2, 3, 2. I think it would be a bigger advantage to the home team because 6 and 7, more games go to 6 and 7 than end in 5 or 4. So I think that's where I see that as a big thing. But always fascinating. And I will mention again, just to keep the streak going, that both of you put in hot goaltending as health as your top issues. And if you believe hot goaltending and health are important, then what are the Predators doing? Anyway, I'm just going to throw that out there.
You will never stop, will you?
All right. The Draft Lottery Simulator. It's time now for the Draft Lottery Simulator. Here we go. Today's winner is... I'm loading it up right now. Here we go. Oh, my goodness. This is something, Kevin, the gods are listening to you. The gods are also worried about the Winnipeg Jets. Now, wait a second. Aren't the Jets in the playoffs right now?
Yeah, they are.
Why are they on the Draft Lottery Simulator list? Hold on.
They're anticipating their fall.
Yeah.
That's bizarre. They have a 1% chance to win. They shouldn't be in here. The Kings are not in here anymore. Huh. Well, actually, that would be the LA Kings then because they'd be the team that should be there. So anyway,
run it again. We should
run it again. Got it. All right. This the kind of disaster the NHL hates. Now everyone in Winnipeg's going to be pissed off. The winner is the Carolina Hurricanes. Not without controversy today. The NHL Draft Simulator is completely.
Well, I'll tell you what. If that happens and a playoff team gets Connor McDavid on draft day, we'll have a real story on that.
Embedded yet? You got to be embedded, Kevin. I want you to be embedded in the lottery process.
Yes,
Yeah,
watch.
I am doing a story on the process next week. I'm going to sit down and talk to him, and I'm trying to get a hold of Ernst & Young. You know.
Yeah, they need to have a reporter that goes along through the entire thing, like that's there with them to watch everything happen.
So we can witness when the league decides that they're going to fix it in favor of the Maple.
Right. We need that. That would be so. It would be so smart on the league's part to send you to do this.
To embed that. Maybe I should suggest that.
Yeah, I mean it would be such a brilliant thing because there would be no doubt. You'd be like, I saw the entire thing. This is what happened. They did this. This is random. Then you have no questions.
I would be embedded with Ernst & Young.
Yes. Sounds like you're a lawyer suddenly. All right.
I'm not going to touch that one.
Yeah, exactly.
Here we go. Thanks, guys, so much. Tomorrow is another day, Thursday. We'll be here tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to be joined by Dan Petru again, who Kevin hasn't done a show with yet, I don't think. Maybe you have.
No, I don't know.
Dan was with us on Monday, and Dan was with us. And Dan's great. He's our Islanders guy. He's really good. So he'll be with us tomorrow. And so we'll talk to you then, guys. Remember, without the buzz, it is just hockey. Talk to you soon.